is no teacher I remember more than Mrs. Doran. Her lessons are passed on to my children. She has a place in thousands of children's memories. Noah Davis. I will never forget the day that Mrs. Doran stopped her lesson because she could tell something was bothering me. I was hungry and she made a point to get me a snack before continuing the class. Thank you, Mrs. Doran, for giving me the building blocks of education and for doing it with such dedication, warmth, and love. Rachie Jacobson Gold. Every year, as Thanksgiving rolls around, I smile and can't help but to think about Mrs. Doran. The hands-down most exciting moment of the year would come as we would receive the news as to which class received the honor to be first in line to try Mrs. Doran's famous hot and fresh Thanksgiving pancakes. We would all soon learn that whichever class won, we were all truly only playing for second place. Rabbi Wender was excitedly first in line. Mrs. Doran taught us that a little syrup can go a long way. Jason Silverman. We had a sleepover in the NPR. That was crazy. She used to give out stuffed animals to take home for a night. I would have done anything to take home that animal. She always went all out on rodeo day, baked beans and all. A personal favorite of mine was the Boxcar Kids. They were such a great teaching tool. Over 20 years later, I can still list their names. The best was that she controlled carpool for the entire school with just a stare. Ari Kellerman. I will never forget Rodeo Day pancake breakfast, the second grade sleepover in the NPR, and the beloved E.T. doll. Most of all, Mrs. Doran has lifted me to greater heights as a teacher, and I am fortunate to be able to call her a true friend. Hannah Weissman. Mrs. Doran is the teacher who you are afraid of when you are in her class, who you love when you're not, and who you respect for the rest of your life. Chaya Miriam Nimchinsky. My special memory of Mrs. Doran is when she let my mom bring butterflies and we all set them free. David Merwis. I remember the special breakfasts she would prepare for us, especially her pancakes. Also the brownies she made us. No one makes brownies like Mrs. Doran. Isaac Merwis. I remember how Mrs. Doran truly cared about each and every one of her students. Once a student of Mrs. Doran, always a student of Mrs. Doran. Meira Nagel. I especially loved her homework packets that she gave the class. I really looked forward to doing my homework because of them. Rebecca Kersner. When I was in first grade, I thought that no one remembered my birthday. Then Mrs. Doran came into the room with a really large birthday cake, which she said was in honor of our joint birthday. Danielle Nimchinsky. I love Mrs. Doran so much. She is creative, organized, and very, very smart. Mrs. Doran is my role model. Eliza Polachek. Mrs. Doran made me love reading. She helped me become a really good reader and taught me how to really understand what I read. Thank you, Mrs. Doran, for always knowing when I need help. Zachary Sirota. She's really nice, but sometimes she is strict. I'm happy she's my teacher. I'm sad that she won't be my teacher next year. Ariella Halprin. Fun class, best teacher. Elisheva Medetsky. I like the fun projects you have us do in class. Chaya Warren. I am proud to say that Mrs. Doran has educated 2 generations of freedmans, spanning 3 decades and 3 different Jewish schools in Houston, Chabad, Hebrew Academy, and Sephardic Gan. As a young child, my impression of Mrs. Doran was that of a no-nonsense lady who stuck to her principles and demanded respect. As a father watching his daughter in her classroom, I realized that the respect that she demanded of her students was self-respect, and that just below the strict surface of her teaching methodology was an ocean of love for every one of her students. The Jewish community of Houston is a better community due to Mrs. Doran's many, many years of teaching our children. Kol HaKavod, Eitan Friedman.